Expressed on the Jerry Cahill CF podcast are that of Jerry Cahill and guests, and not necessarily those of the Boomer Esiason Foundation. Nothing on the Jerry Cahill CF podcast should be considered medical advice. Such advice can only be given by a physician who is experienced with cystic fibrosis. The Boomer Esiason Foundation, Jerry Cahill and guests cannot be held responsible for any damage which may result from using the information on this podcast without the permission of your medical doctor. You're listening to the Jerry Cahill CF podcast presented by the Boomer Esiason Foundation and jerrycahill.com.
Welcome to Jerry Cahill's Living, Breathing, Succeeding podcast series. This show, 20 years post-double lung transplant with CF, has been made possible with financial support from Mylan Pharmaceutical. Today you'll meet Andrea Eisenman from New York City, diagnosed with CF at 9 months of age. Andrea is 55 years old, received a double lung transplant 20 years ago at age 35 on April 25, 2000 at New York Presbyterian. Andrea stays very active post-transplant and lives a full life involved in sports, competing in the U.S. Transplant Games, volunteering her time for organ awareness and organ donation, volunteering with the CF Roundtable, a newsletter for adults with CF, and directing a documentary about CF in closed communities. Andrea is happily married to her husband Steve for over 11 years.
I'm Andrea, I'm 55, I have cystic fibrosis. I was diagnosed at 9 months of age. I had a transplant for cystic fibrosis when I was 35. So I am going to be 20 years post-transplant in April. And I never thought I would be here, but here I am. I lived a pretty normal life. I grew up in New York City, went to public school. I went to an arts high school. I went to music and art at the time. I studied art. And then I went to SUNY Purchase and also studied art. And I was a painter. But then I decided, on advice from my father, that I should go into something where I could make money and get insurance. So I became a graphic designer. And I worked in that field for about 20 years. I got involved with an organization called CF Roundtable. We try to enable people to feel part of a community, and it's also made me feel part of a community where, I've met people that I wouldn't have known otherwise, and it's given me a great support system. Growing up in the dark ages with CF, I was diagnosed in 1965. And the doctors told my parents to take me home and to expect that I would die at 5. At that time, there were no enzymes in pill form. There was a powder to be mixed into my food, which was disgusting, and I barely ate anything. It wasn't until Pulmozyme was released, I guess, in the late 80s, early 90s, that things started to get a little bit better for me. But there was really not a lot of hope in the dark ages of CF for people like me with pretty severe lung damage in my 20s. Before transplant, my schedule was about 6 hours of treatments interspersed during the day with napping. Napping was not included. But now post-transplant, my schedule is about 2.5 hours in the morning of inhalation, steaming, nasal lavage, percussion, eating, and then I'm ready to do my day. And then at night, my treatments are about 3 hours because I have a compression machine after the sinuses, the sinus rinses, the steaming, the inhalations, and then an arm machine, compression. I'm very preventative, and that's why I still do all these treatments. I know many people don't do inhalations and they don't do all the steaming and the sinus lavage, but I'm used to doing it, so I keep doing it. And I just don't want to have any regrets and look back and say, I should have done more treatments when I had the chance. I attribute my longevity to staying as positive as possible and keeping a sense of humor when I could. My mom and I definitely always tried to laugh about things, and I think she instilled in me that there's always somebody worse off than you, and that I should be grateful. I think the way I cope the best is keeping my mind busy with positive things like exercise, reading a book, being with friends. I mean, even just talking to a friend on the phone takes me out of myself. The reason I exercise a lot is because I am a bit anxious. I have a lot of anxiety and depression. And I found that exercising like once a day, like getting on my bike and sweating, really relieves that. But I've also started to exercise seriously because a lot of my friends with CF and transplant who are no longer alive were not doing things like that. And so either they would be back on oxygen or they were no longer alive. And so I decided I never want to be back in that place. I was listed for 6 years for a transplant. I think it was the last 4 years where I found it difficult to do things, and mainly because my lungs bled when I did airway clearance. I could tell, I mean, I knew that my lungs were just shot, and there was a certain point, even when I was on oxygen, I could tell, I can't do very much. So I basically stayed home most days. I've had numerous skin cancer removals. I had 4 Mohs on my head, surgeries on my head. I had melanoma on my left shoulder, and I had 1 squamous up here. I mean, I look like I've been shot, numerous times. I know that when I wear a bathing suit, people think, what's going on there? I've got my port, it's scar tissue alley here. But I mean, I'm proud of my scars. That's, why I'm still here. I never thought I would live this long post-transplant. I mean, I wasn't even sure I was going to get a transplant because I was giving up hope when I was waiting. But, my friends and my mom were very positive around me, and they were just like, you have to keep pushing. And there were days I just wanted to give up. But then now, on the other side of things, post-transplant, I still am in disbelief that it's going to be 20 years that I'm alive after this gift I was given. I want to encourage people that they can live a long life after transplant. And it is work. It's not easy. But I feel like I've never breathed better in my life that I can remember. I mean, sure, probably as a child. But I mean, since my teens, breathing has been labored. I've always been congested. I never felt great. And after transplant, immediately I felt good. I think a lot of people are afraid. I understand. I was a little afraid, but I felt I had no option left. I mean, I really had so little lung function when I was waiting. I was teetering around 20% of my PFT lung function. And when I finally got the transplant, I was between 13 and 15%. Post-transplant, my life has changed like 180. I'm able to live on my own. I wasn't living on my own before. I was living with my mom. My possibilities, at least initially, were endless. I was free to go and travel once I was 6 months post-transplant. I mean, it was totally a turnaround. It was beyond what I had ever imagined. I met my donor's family. I was writing a letter to them, but as you know, it's very difficult to say thank you in that level of appreciation. But my father wrote a letter right away, and they got his letter, so they knew about me. And the daughter of the woman who was my donor wanted to meet, and they were just happy to see that part of their mother was living on. If my donor were here, I mean, I would just thank her and tell her how much her gift has meant to me, my family, and my friends. And I mean, because of her gift, I was able to take care of my mother when she was ill. So, I mean, I wouldn't have been able to do that had I not made it through the transplant and had not been given the lungs to do so. So I feel like she's just changed my life completely, and I would just thank her as much as I could. I think what I would tell newly transplanted patients is, listen to your doctors, but live your life. I mean, my doctor told me, we didn't transplant you to live in a bubble. So, I went out to the gym, I did things in life, and I found my new life. And I would tell them, find what you like doing, stay safe, be compliant, check in with your doctors if you're unsure, and just enjoy, take deep breaths. I feel like quality versus quantity is preferable for me. I'd rather have quality than quantity. Right now I kind of have both, but I can see how delicate the balance is. And I guess the goals are just keep going as long as I can.